Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Phoebe Wong, an investment partner at Amazon Climate Pledge Fund. Phoebe, you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. So, as we chatted a little bit before our session, I actually started as a engineer. So I did a material science engineering for my undergrad training, and then I did a minor in environmental engineering without knowing that in future I would devote most of my life in the sustainability. So my first job was engineer. So I was with ExxonMobil in the refinery and really working very hard as a chemical engineer. And then eventually decided, hey, it's time for me to broaden my experience. So I did a CFA, which is Chartered Financial Analyst, to set the foundation of the business and then the financial acumen. I actually think that's a really good one. If your undergrad is very similar to me, very science and technology heavy, CFA is actually pretty good, especially for the level one. It has from the basics of financial statements analysis to all the way to what is portfolio management. Um, and then I also did my MBA with the Rice University, and that actually was pretty good to set the right foundation of the professional path. What usually happens is you one door closed and then you have another door or another window open. So one thing that I did really I thank myself at that time is I did a lot of part-time when I was doing my MBA. So one of the part-time leads me into a consulting company called Acorn Systems. And the person, the gentleman, Steve Anderson, who had that company actually has a private equity / venture capital firm. So when I reach out to the folks that I have worked with before and then in my professional network to ask for any sort of job, I was literally looking out for, I don't know, even office manager at that time to make sure that I have the status to work in the States. So, and then he's, hey, I have this fund. Do you want to work in my fund? And I was, okay, this is a opportunity. I think even now for MBA students, it's pretty hard to just your first job is directly in the VC or PE because the typical path is, hey, you do like 2 or 3 years as an associate in the investment banking, and then you move into the buy side, either hedge fund, private equity, or venture capital. So I think I was fortunate enough to start in my journey pretty fast into the VC space. So that also started my career in the VC, especially in the clean tech VC 10 years ago. So fast forward, during the 10 years, I have been working mostly as a VC, but I also have a short stint and back in the investment banking advisory with Crushville Capital, and then also started my own company at Care D&D, which is a childcare Airbnb for childcare platform. So I'm pretty happy where I am, and hopefully I can share some advice or tips to anyone in the audience who's trying to start their journey in CVC.
Thank you, Phoebe. And clearly it's contribution to society, but also contribution to the planet, given you invest in the energy space. Maybe let's unpack a little bit. Do you think this engineering background plus a CFA level one that you mentioned was a really nice foundation for what you do today?
Yes, I think especially for where I'm investing, so I invest in deep tech and very technology heavy startups. So the science and engineering background is really helpful. And then for the CFA, level one is enough, although I did all three, but the level one is really setting the foundation. The higher you go, it's more on the portfolio management as a hedge fund or portfolio a manager, less so on the corporate venture or venture capital side. So I think CFA and MBA, either one would be sufficient enough for you to get to the good foundation.
Very nice. And then you worked in a VC with a fund, and then you decided to move to a corporate VC. So Maybe you can share with us why corporate VC is more appealing to you.
Absolutely. So corporate VCs, if you look at TDK or Ansel Climate Pledge Fund, so we have an overarching goal is to help our mothership to improve whether it's operating efficiency or in my case is to reduce their carbon footprint. So I think each corporate has their own strategic goal, which by definition of the corporation is actually really big. If you think about our investments, typically is $5 to $10 million. Maybe we invest in $100 million sometimes, but the return on the financial return does not is not comparable to the strategic return that we could have if the technology is being adopted by Amazon's all the retail shops and all the retail platforms for like, one energy storage company's applications. And for example, for our data center, right, it's going to be huge compared to just the financial returns.
Very nice. I have to ask, but what are the top tips you would share with the audience about negotiation when it comes to corporate VC?
Absolutely. So there's one thing that the one sheet, negotiation sheet that you can Google. I think there should be something called a negotiation prep sheet. So they actually break down to principal and agent from your end and principal and agent from the opposite end. And then spell out what are their ZOPA, their zone of negotiation possibilities. So on the negotiation, it's not zero sum game, but actually, if you negotiate well, it should be you can grow the pie. So always identify what are the value creation levers that their side would have and your side would have. A lot of times when we do negotiation on the fly, but it is actually always good before you enter into negotiation session to have this list out so that you don't have any blind points. And then there's also two things that I want to point out. One is about the principal and an agent relationship, especially in VC and then in the entrepreneur side. So, for example, from the RVC side, it doesn't matter whether you're a VC or a corporate VC, or the deal leads like us, right, partners, etc. Our interests are fully aligned with our, let's say, mothership or the funds, but there is still some discrepancies there. We need to be mindful about that. And then for the entrepreneur side, sometimes they would have their lawyers involved. Sometimes they would have their CFO involved or CEO, or sometimes their founders have their founder structure has a different ways. So you always get to know who is the negotiation person, who basically the agent, and then who they represent, which are the principles, and then to understand what are the areas that you can tweak and to have the proper game plan to address that. And then the second point is there are two levels of negotiation. One level is what do you get from the negotiation? For example, the term sheet negotiation, what you get for liquid preference, what you get for valuation, what you get for board seat, et cetera, et cetera. The other level, which is potentially more important, is the relationship. So through the negotiation, it's actually a good way to build a solid relationship. You want to make sure that you carry yourself well, and at the same time, you're also evaluating the other side, right? And I always think the VC job and the VC or entrepreneur innovation is a long-term game. So we typically would be with our investees, with our entrepreneurs for at least 5 to 7 years, which is way higher than the average American marriage lifetime. So it's an important and meaningful relationship. You want to make sure that as you negotiate, you're building out a positive relationship, which will set the right foundation going forward instead of, hey, this is a one-time transactional negotiation. So I think that these are the 2 points that I would want to highlight.
It's two golden nuggets in one. Actually, I'm going to double click on the second one because I see so many negotiation tips, but they're in two categories. The ones where you don't care about the relationship, it's a one-off, buying a car or whatever. And then you have the one where you do care about the relationship. And most people confuse the tips between the two, but actually the negotiation techniques for when you do care about the relationship and it's meant to be a long-term relationship is really different. And I'm so bad at the first part of negotiation, but I'm better at the one where it's long-term relationship. And that's something I learned from all of these exercises. To function as a team requires time as well. And it's not during the board meeting that you can really build a team spirit. So do you have any tips about how you are building this team spirit? It's not just one-on-one, it's actually as a team so that you have a very high functioning board.
That's a really good question. From my side, I remember there are actually kind of two sets of situation given where we are now. One set is the very normal, you get to know folks on the board, and then hopefully you already know the management team very well before you invest in them or before you sit on the board. So that relationship should be pretty strong, or at least when you first get on the board you should have the honeymoon period with the entrepreneur. So, ask the entrepreneur, ask the CEO to give you the lay of land. What are the different personalities of different board members? And then, if you have the time, do one-on-ones with them to bring the personal side of each one to build at that first foundation. And then, it is also a very good way because you're coming in as a blank piece of paper. You don't know any internal discussions. So what are the different relationships between before, or what are the problems or opportunities in the future? So one thing that I usually ask is, what do you think is the current companies? What are the top problems that you have seen before? What are the top opportunities that you see we can develop in the future? So understand everyone's perspective, everyone's interpretation of the situation could be different. But then if you have to have this same conversation with every single board member as well as the management team, usually it would have a pretty good lay of land context. So some board is more technical than I'll bring my CFA and VA experience in. Some team are more commercially sound. Then I would try to be more of the technical person in the team. So you would be able to find your position in the team. And then it's also good to help other board members to identify what are their role in the small team. And then after that, once you build out your credibility and your relationship with other board members and the management team, you win their confidence, you earn their trust. At that time, I think it's very good to influence the team to be a more functioning team. For example, some or actually many of the board that I join in, they don't have the HR committee. And it's a pretty good place, especially for early stage companies. It's very normal that they don't have auditing committee, they don't have HR committee, but it's also always good to suggest to have one and then to think about how to better incentivize the management team. Are there anything that in the current situation that we can do a little bit better? And then sometimes involve the external consultants and platforms. And so that way, it's actually really helpful to help the management team to grow into a more professional team. I see good board actually handle those well is having some precursor discussions before the board meeting. It could be even during the board dinner, right before the board meeting, to have collect people's opinions and then really kind of have the pre-discussion and make sure that everyone's socialized with some idea. For example, a company wants to that's trying to get people various perspective and then make sure that everyone is working on the problem and but everyone's perspective is being addressed. So I think those pre-socialization discussion are very important and you can potentially have this resolved without having heated debate during the board meeting.
Wow. Packed with golden nuggets. Thank you. I think it's very interesting. So maybe at this point, I want to ask about Amazon Climate Pledge Fund. And clearly you're passionate about energy, sustainability, doing well for the planet. So maybe you can share a bit your motivation to join the fund, but also what is the mission of the fund and how this mission is being delivered today? Because it's a 3-year-old fund, so it's still just getting started.
Absolutely. So Amazon Climate Pledge Fund, we're a $2 billion evergreen fund. 3 years old, we have invested in over 20 companies now. The Basically the way that I see this opportunity is huge. So we are looking at companies in the sustainability side that could help not only Amazon to reduce our footprint, which is already a very big mission, but also we have the Climate Pledge, which is a separate um, organization whereby right now we have around 400 signatories. So think about companies like HP, like Procter and Gamble, Unilever, PepsiCo. So these huge companies are also signed for the climate pledge. We call them the signatory. So our fund, we have the vision to invest in companies like Moxion, like Pachama, like Rivian to help not only Amazon, but also our signatories to reduce their carbon footprint. So if you think about that strategic value that you and I have discussed before, this is a very big platform where by investing in a small company, in an uprising innovation company, we can make a huge impact in the world.
This is very meaningful. Now, you mentioned evergreen. Do you mind explaining what evergreen means and what are the pros and cons of an evergreen fund?
Absolutely. So I think everyone has their own definition of evergreen. For us, it means that we would have the $2 billion fund. We others off the balance sheet, but as we grow, as long as our investment mandate stays, typically we won't run out of money. So there's really no limit for us to invest in. Right now, for companies that we have exited, it's also still be part of the fund. So I think it's a very strong endorsement and statement stating that, hey, we're going to be very serious about sustainability and climate pledge and make sure that we have enough capital, we have enough resources, manpower, etc., to help our companies to grow into the next stage and to invest in the right innovative companies.
Very nice. So potentially you invested in 20 companies, but 10, 20 years ago, it could become hundreds. One of the things which maybe you could share, especially for the entrepreneurs when they get an evergreen fund funding, there is no notion of a reserve or commitment to follow investments, but at the same time, there is money that to be used for follow investment. So how do you communicate expectations about what the fund can, will, and will not do?
That's a really good question. So I think it is important to communicate this well, right? Evergreen fund, or I think typical fund now, all have this understanding that we need to continue to support the startups. It's not the one round of investments, it's typically several rounds of investments. But obviously, it is different for each fund. Some funds reserve like a 20% for future follow-ons, and some funds would reserve like 75% if they start at the seed stage, which typically involves very small check size, but much bigger in the A and B side. So I think it's important to understand each CVC and each fund, what's best for your fund and what would work for your fund. And then once you have that understanding or your guide or your foundation, then communicate to the company that, hey, we typically would reserve or we typically would follow on if you perform well. So I think it's always good to give that as a potential future endorsement. I think it's well received from the company. But if the companies or startups are not doing well, um, I have seen CVCs, like the startups would always come back to the not only CVCs but also VCs, right? Anyone who's their existing investors as the bridging fund. So I think that's at that moment, if you know the company is not doing well, do your evaluation. If it's down round, then down round. If it doesn't make sense to invest, then I think it's important to let the company know as well. So I think the communication, set the right expectation upfront is important. It's always good to say, hey, typically we would, but there's also situations that they don't, they don't have the wrong expectation. And I think it's well understood in the ecosystem too. Yeah.
Very nice. Now, you work for very good CVCs, VP Ventures, Shell Ventures, now Amazon Climate Hedge Fund. What type of best practice do you think you could share with the audience about investment decision making? And here I'm talking not just investment committee, but also the investment team, how they think about making the investment.
That's a really good question. And I always say that everyone has their own sets of different investment committee or investment process. What I have identified, there are like three things that typically works well. One is very thorough analysis of the company. So write a good memo and get the feedback early is really good. That'll save a lot of energy down the road. The second one is healthy debate. So that is also coming back. I think relationship is probably the theme of our discussions today. I think in the investment committee and then in the team, and typically CVC and financial VCs, we're all pretty small team. So this should be relatively easy to address. You want to have a good enough relationship with everyone to have that debate so that people won't feel reserved or won't feel their feelings hurt if they give very critical feedback or receive direct feedback of the deal. And then I think the third is really having a mechanism that you can make a decision fast. This is typically for CVCs, because for VCs, based on my experience, sometimes under certain threshold, even partners or principals, they will be able to write the check so that they can get in the deal. But then for CVC, because we have the strategic angle, and then because our corporate setting, sometimes you need to get approval from SVP or from CTO or from CFO, then depending on your structure, that probably will give you some delay in decisions. So make sure that you have a practical mechanism to turning this decision or this discussion and then make the decisions fast.
That makes sense. Now, let's make the case for why you think corporate VCs are uniquely placed to help with sustainability.
This is a great question. I think it's basically, I think corporate VCs are very unique and we have our own advantages in the sustainability. So the first one is about the strategic value we have mentioned. We have so many companies that are in the Fortune 500 space, whereby companies will be able to get the sustainability innovations not only improved in our own fund portfolio, but also in our corporate venture, the mothership. So the second one is around the impact. If you think about funds, they are very good at help the portfolio companies to market. But then if we think about TDK, if you think about Amazon Climate Pledge, think about Shell, think about BP, these are large companies that already have a huge like a market presence. So that would be able to provide a lot of help for technologies, innovations to be shared in the market. Yeah.
Very nice. And then my last question for our session is going to be about what are you most excited to invest next?
That's a great question. So I'm very excited around actually quite a few things, but right now my focus is in two areas. One is the plastics and circular economy, because I think that's a very important problem for us to solve. The second area is the building and building environment. Because if you think about the whole carbon, like a CO2 emission, actually, our buildings has a lot of embodied carbon. And
Yep.
if you can have innovations around trees or cement, these are like a huge areas that we can reduce our carbon footprint. So these are the exciting stuff that you will see us doing more in the coming year.
Very nice. So thank you, Phoebe. I think all the entrepreneurs have heard what you're excited about to invest next. And you shared a lot of golden nuggets for corporate VCs and their corporations and motherships to listen to. So thank you Phoebe, very much.
Thank you so much, Nicola.